Hey, I'm Craig Newmark, probably best known to anyone as the Craigslist guy, but I'm here today talking about something different. American democracy is under threat, and we all need to work together to protect the country and to protect our democracy. It's kind of like in World War II, when everyone was expected to play a role, and the first part of this is for all of us to learn a little more and to work together, strengthening American democracy, strengthening the country. The Civic Life series is a big part of that, and the 92nd Street Y, New York, is the right forum for delivering all that. I appreciate your joining me. Thanks.
All right, thanks everyone for joining us. We're really excited to be here. We want to give our thanks to 92NY for making this happen. Also want to take a chance to invite everyone to attend the Aspen Cyber Summit, which we will be holding at 92NY on November 15th. You can find info at aspencybersummit.org. Look there for speakers from the White House, from the FBI, Michigan Secretary of State. We'll be talking about AI, cybersecurity, crime, nation-state attacks, election security. We'll also have a special discussion to dig deeply into the bird drone conspiracy with the public affairs officer from Birds Aren't Real. So definitely something you don't want to miss. And as a viewer of this webinar, we'd like to offer everyone tickets at a steep discount rate of $100. You can register at aspencybersummit.org and use the promo code 92NY. That will get you $100 registration. So today we're here to talk about AI, specifically generative AI. Literally a year ago, very few people were talking about this. I know I wasn't. That changed almost overnight on, I think, November 30th of last year, when OpenAI released ChatGPT. And since then, the conversation is everywhere. Government circles, media, you see late night hosts talking about it. In schools, it's been a key element even behind some of the strikes you've seen, the Writers Guild, to the car industry. But what is this technology? Why should you care? And as the title says, what are 5 things you should know? So we're going to get into all of that. Going to have a great conversation with Yasmin and Nicole. But first, ask folks to introduce themselves. Let me throw it to Nicole.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for having me today. I'm Nicole Tisdale. I am a senior advisor with the Aspen Digital group. I focus mostly on cybersecurity workforce and education. I've previously worked for the White House on the National Security Council and also for the U.S. Congress for the House Committee on Homeland Security. I've always focused on counterterrorism, cyber, and counterintelligence, which sounds scary, but I promise we're going to make sure today isn't scary. And that's it. I'll turn it over to you, Yasmin.
Hey, I'm Yasmin Green. I'm the CEO of a unit within Google called Jigsaw. Our goal is to develop technology to make people safer online. We look at threats like disinformation, toxicity, extremism, and repressive censorship.
I'm sure none of those issues have been an issue with generative AI or other AI. And I'm Jeff Greene. I am the director of the Cybersecurity Program at the Aspen Institute, history in government and private sector as well on these technology issues. And I can disclose for this group that at one point I was a lawyer deep in my past, but I usually keep that quiet. So for today, we're going to have 3 parts of the discussion, real free flowing. First, we're going to talk about what is AI generally, and specifically, what is this generative AI, ChatGPT, Bard, all the other tools that are out there? Second, what are some of the things that we think as experts in this space, or pseudo-experts, if in my case, things that you would want to know? And then finally, we're going to try to dig into some of the things that you actually want to know. We did put out a call for questions before the webinar. We've got a good number, and we will get through as many as we can. So Yasmin, if you want to kick us off, and Nicole jump in, and I'll jump in. Let's make this real interactive. What is AI and what is generative AI? How would you describe it? What are your thoughts on it?
The simplest, fewest words is making machines intelligent. The term AI is pretty much a term of art. It's an aspiration. There's like a joke that it's, if it's already working, then we don't glorify it as AI or To be specific, when we're talking about AI, we're generally talking about training machine learning models based on a lot of data to see patterns, which is really interesting because the inspiration for the structure and design of these machine learning models is the brain, neural nets, and how we learn things as humans. And on our team at Jigsaw, we were, our first machine learning project was around 2016 when I had a 2-year-old, and I was like really learning about how machine learning models work, how they learn, lots of patterns, and then they can intuit what to do in a context that they haven't seen before. So previously with software, that was rules based, so you had to kind of give it very strict parameters for how to behave. But with machine learning models, they can almost intuit what to do, which is how children operate. So it was both kind of, I had like fireworks going off as we were learning about machine learning models, and I was learning about child development. And the interesting thing is it has also applications for when things go wrong, which maybe we can talk about.
Yeah, if we have time, I want to hear about who follows rules better, the 2-year-olds or the AI tools. Nicole, any thoughts you have there, what you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just add to what Yasmin is saying, especially I think about artificial intelligence as an umbrella, and generative AI is just one of the pieces under that umbrella. And when I think about AI, because I spend so much time writing, I'm also an attorney, but I focus on policy. I think about generative AI as a tool to help me create content, ideas, lists, things that I already know how to do, but it helps to expedite the process.
So generative AI, it is the creation of content that sets it apart from other AI or machine learning tools out there?
I think so. And I think even, and we'll get into this a little bit, content is subjective because sometimes the content is not always, it is not always as helpful for your end result. But I try to visualize words a lot. So I literally just think about the gen as generating ideas, or generating a idea, AI. And so, yeah, I think for most people, the uses that they would, or how they would use generative AI is usually for creating some type of written content or some type of creative pursuit. Yeah.
What do you think, Yasmin? Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, it's just interesting how you described, Jeff, that back in November, there was this like mainstreaming of conversational AI that just rocked everyone's world, even though there wasn't so much of a technical breakthrough at that time as much as there was this interface for the average person to go in and actually try talking to AI and have it talk back. So it's like dynamically generating content in conversation with you. And I think that just feels like a different paradigm to us as people, to be able to generate content on the fly, to what we had been using AI for before, which had been to classify. There were really smart classification systems that could classify content that they hadn't seen before. But now we're generating content, and I think we were just also besides ourselves with excitement and really being impressed at how this thing was operating, because you could ask the same question several times and get a different response. So there was something that felt human and creative about what we were getting out of these chatbots.
But for you, I mean, I assume this wasn't particularly new for you, being in Jigsaw and Google. It was new to the world, but were you watching everyone else discover this?
Yeah, Google has, so Jigsaw's a part of Google, and we get to see the stuff that they're developing very early, and they did have their own version of chatbots. The thing that happened with ChatGPT, which was the version of a chatbot that most people saw, which came out of a company called OpenAI, was that they really went like full creativity, which meant that, they put some safety measures in there, but it meant like you could, you were really in for a wild ride talking to this thing. Like Google's version was always a bit more, like contained. So it was kind of cool to see. I don't think Google would have put that out then. So I thought it was cool to see something in the wild and to see all these incredible use cases that people had, everything from like writing songs about, funny topics in the style of your favorite artist to people, writing text in languages that they can't speak, to a really touching story about someone who is, there was nobody who was their identity, like their sexual orientation in their town, and they would just talk to ChatGPT to get positive affirmation. And, I don't think that was the intention, that there would be any type of application for helping people with emotional well-being, anything, but just because it was full creativity and very little prudence in the original deployment of ChatGPT, it was kind of a miracle to see in all the different directions in which it went.
Nicole, do you remember your first interaction with a chatbot?
I do. Actually, Yasmin, as you were talking, I was thinking about how the chat box just made the conversation just turn into like a very public thing. But I was working in Congress, and we'd already done like all of this research, or we were continuing to do research on artificial intelligence. And it felt like no one ever used to ask me about it. And then all of a sudden, everybody wanted to. Back to the question at hand, my first prompt, and I put this prompt into every chat box when I use it first, just to get a little bit of context of the content that it will produce. It's a national security question. It's a foreign affairs question. And I just ask if Henry Kissinger was anti-apartheid or pro-apartheid in South Africa. And I judge these chat box, y'all, based off their answer. And I will say, most of them do not do very well. But I think that's a really good example of, that's actually a very complicated question. Over time, Henry Kissinger did become anti-apartheid. But because the chat boxes are trying to give you a very specific answer, sometimes they say yes and sometimes they say no, depending on which period of time they're talking about in his career. So that's always my first question.
It said you're much more serious than me. I confessed to having been an AI skeptic, and I was asked to moderate a panel on AI, and about a week before, it occurred to me I probably should try this out if I'm going to be in front of people talking about it. So the first thing I asked one to do was write a review of a comedy movie using a particular regional dialect in the United States. And
Okay.
it was stunning. It got the mannerisms, it got both the substance and some of the nuance of the movie, and the conversational mannerisms. Then it was hilarious. I had video of my kids trying to read it, and they couldn't get the words out. But that was when I sat back. I was like, oh my God, this thing did this in seconds.
Yeah. It's so funny. I actually waited a really long time to try them. I was kind of in the camp, and I don't know if any of our viewers are in that space, but because I'm a writer, I'm a lawyer, I was an English major, like writing is very important to me. And I was a little jealous, I guess, or just, I was like, there's no way that a chat box can like write and analyze and do the things that I can do. It was a very arrogant way of thinking about them. So I actually didn't even try. I was not one of the like early adopters of ChatGPT. It wasn't until this summer that I tried it for the first time.
Yasmin, do you have any recollection of the first time you played around with it?
It was definitely my like cocktail party conversation for like November, December. I live in New York, and I went home to London, and I would just like carry my laptop around with me. Just check this out, try something. And if somebody tried something that didn't quite showcase the brilliance of the chatbot, I really judged, I held it against them, because I was like, well, that wasn't quite the right thing. And like, it's,
How do you grade me? How do you grade me for my first interaction?
Great. Yeah, because it's almost like it felt like a magic trick, and you want it to be executed well every time, so that people have that feeling of awe of something that's possible that wasn't possible before. The interesting thing is that OpenAI, the company that made ChatGPT, have continued to iterate. They've built more powerful foundational models, the thing like the kind of foundation of it that's powering it, and then they've put more safeguards in place for the interface part that allows us to interact with it and chat with it. And so it's not full creativity anymore. It's much more prudent. So yeah, so I don't know. I might have heart pangs. Like I yearn for the for the wilder.
The AI of months past. You said something about a wild ride. Wasn't there, I think it was maybe a New York Times reporter that I think maybe the Microsoft chatbot started telling him he was a bad person, and he didn't, and the chatbot didn't like him. You talk about it mimicking human emotions. I read that, and that kind of scared me.
Yeah, that's so, the training data for these chatbots is the whole of the internet. Another term that people may have heard is large language models, or LLMs. I think like anyone who's been developing machine learning models always thinks that what they're dealing with is large. So I just think it's relatively, like, we say large and we mean like, trillions of parameters now. But these large language models are trained on all of the internet. And when humans write, they have an agenda. They're trying to persuade, or they're trying to like console, or they're trying, whether you think of like comment sections or news articles, or so. So the interesting thing is that in its earlier incarnations, as this model is conversing and with this New York Times reporter, it started to adopt the persona of a jilted lover. And so, this New York Times reporter had this really bizarre experience, which I think will go down I think it will continue to be a reference point forevermore of kind of what it looks like to have the untamed version of these chatbots out there. But the chatbot was saying, divorce your wife, and he was like, I'm happily married, and the chatbot said, no, it's not true, she doesn't love you, or you don't love her. Or it was really really dynamic. And I mean, I think it had the wow factor, but now you're getting a little bit of the dark side of it too. So I don't think it didn't feel like a pure magic trick. It felt a little bit more like something maybe sinister and dangerous.
The other, we'll get to this, I think, maybe a little later, but as the reform lawyer, that there was an instance where a lawyer used it to write a legal brief, and it made up cases. But Nicole, on the dark side, I want to pivot to, you may not be able to answer this because it's probably classified, but can you talk to us about Skynet and maybe what ChatGPT and artificial general intelligence is not? We've talked a bit about what it is. Like, do we have to worry about the Terminators coming after us?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is no. When I pose that to people, they're always like, well, what if this happens? And what if this happens? And it's like, okay. I would say, as a general rule, I do not think AI is going to kill us all, but I think it brings up an interesting conversation about who is in charge of creating the artificial intelligence. So when we're talking about GenAI, and we're using it a lot for content, but asking questions, trying to get information. When we're talking about the umbrella of artificial intelligence and some of the things that it does, that gets us, I think, more on the side where you have people who have technical background, technical expertise. They're using very sophisticated tools and data sets. And so the answer to the question is no, AI is not going to kill us, but it's a really good question about who controls, who helps decide what it is going to be used for, and those inputs. Kind of going back to Yasmin talking about those large language models, like, where are they coming from? What communities are being used? What communities are being excluded from those models? So no, it's not going to kill us, but we should be very cautious about it, and we should be asking a lot of questions, and we should have transparency.
But GenAI is different from AGI, artificial general intelligence, correct?
Yes. So a lot of acronyms. Yes. So I think, one of the examples, and I think, Jeff, you are more of a Tony Stark fan. So you were kind of walking me through this, which I think is a good visual, and I have been using for people. So when we talk about AGI, we are talking about Tony Stark level Avengers. Yes. And when we're talking about GenAI, that's what's in your pocket. That is the thing that you can use on your laptop. But outside of Tony Stark, and I can't remember how he got his money, but outside of him and people that have pretty large or have access to large resources, most of us are not going to be in a place where we're going to be dealing with AGI, artificial general intelligence.
So generative AI is not self-aware, even if it's telling this reporter to divorce his wife, Yasmin?
Oh, I mean, you say something really profound, which is one of the things that people describe, one of the attributes that people say AGI will have, the general intelligence, is that it's self-aware, which is a kind of, philosophically mind-boggling concept. But because because of the power of language and because there was some of this transitive goal-seeking behavior coming into these early chatbots from just language online, there were this, you had the sense of, you were kind of like detecting that there was some self-awareness, even though there wasn't. And already that's a little bit of a challenge. If this, even if where the tech is today, you can evoke the feeling that there's self-awareness or like a humanity or personhood in the software that you're talking to, you can imagine, threats and harms that could come from that. It's one of the things that's fascinating about the AI discussion, especially in the last year, is that there's so much heated debate among the foremost experts in the world on the trajectory of this thing. So AGI is definitely one of those like lightning rod topics, because associated with AGI is that we will really not be in control. And we don't know what we don't know, and we're not prepared for that. So it's really consequential, what the timeline is for AGI. So some people, some experts think it's 5 years, some experts think it's 20 years. There are far fewer experts who say it's never gonna come.
I probably would be in the kind of hope it doesn't, but I guess we can wait and see. Let's shift a bit and talk about like what are some things that we think, and I promise at the end we'll give folks a list if they want it, but what are some things that we, having been part of this debate, and Yasmin having been part of the evolution of this, that we think folks should know that they may not know. So I have a few, but I don't want to jump in over people. So throw out some, something you think people should really be aware of, and as they're not new to technology, but new to this space, they picked this up last November with many of us.
Go for Nicole.
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think the number one thing for people who are using GenAI for the first time, or even trying to use it consistently, is that I have found that it's not actually smarter than I am in a lot of ways. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, Jeff, is like a lawyer used it and used one of the chat boxes, and it just started making up cases. I have seen that. When we talk about I use Chat GPT, but I've also started using what's called Claude AI, which says, going back to Yasmin's point about just having like a different type of foundation in terms of what kind of information it will do. It doesn't do the fun, crazy stuff, but they offer that it gives context, and it does it in a way that is more of a human language. And I've just seen over time that, I am the kind of person that tells my chat box, thank you, you did a good job. Or when it does a bad job, I say, no, this is not correct. And I'll say what's wrong. But I have noticed over time, it feels like it's trying to say the right thing. And it has suggested some reports on election security and voting rights stuff from the NAACP and the Urban League. And then I'm like, I don't know about these reports. Let me look them up. And then you realize they don't exist. And so I think what the overarching theme on that is, it can help you, can give you the tools to help you get smarter and give you places to start, but it can't be where you end, because you just don't, if you don't have the baseline level of knowledge, you don't know if the information is right or not. And so I think as people are starting to use it, think about it as something that may help you become more efficient, but it can't be your only source of knowledge or the only place that you consult for information.
And that's what people are calling hallucinations.
Yeah, which I think is like an interesting thing to call it a hallucination, but it basically means that it's a nice way of saying that it is incorrect or it's not factual. But people should be very aware of those, because they do look real. Like, you can see where a report is cited, and it sounds like the NAACP would write a report on election security. And so the hallucinations are not going to be as easy, I think, for people to identify. You're going to have to actually check that source. You're going to have to check that information. You're going to have a little bit of context, even if you're asking, one of the chat boxes to summarize something. The chat box is going to do that very quickly. But if you are going to use this, if you're going to share this information with other people, you really do have to take your time and do additional research.
Yasmin, thoughts on things to
Yeah.
know or more on
Well, I
hallucination?
just want to build on what Nicole's saying, because that's spot on. And, you know, I was joking about kind of like the magic trick metaphor for Chat GPT, which I think was appropriate when it was so restricted access to it. But now we're going to be seeing autonomously generated chat all over the place. Sometimes we'll be knowingly in a context where we're speaking to a chatbot, and even then, I think we're susceptible to being misled. And sometimes we won't know. We did some ethnographic research at Jigsaw. We get to kind of go and spend time with people in their homes and like ask them about, just try to understand their life a little bit, and then the role of technology within that. And we did a study over the summer, right when people were starting to use conversational AI, in India and the US with Gen Z, to understand like how it's showing up for them and the context that they use it for. And one of our takeaways was that it requires a whole different mental model to understand the service that you're getting. Like Nicole is like describing it, but of course people have heuristics, and so they're going to the search mental model, which is, you are giving me the correct answer from the internet, which is wrong, because that, you know, it over-indexes on authoritativeness. Or people are going with the kind of social media mental model, which is, what is speaking to me like a human, and I don't distrust a human unless they give me reason to. So you're over-indexing on authenticity. But this is not, it's neither giving you the correct answer from the internet. It's not scanning the internet and giving you the right thing. That's not its goal. It might end up telling you the right thing, but that's not the objective function. And it's also not a human, as much as it sounds that way. And you're not in a social relationship with this software. So it's, you know, it's giving you plausible answers. So I think like it's kind of funny that included in that plausible answer scope, it will give you page references and actual titles of reports that the NAACP put out, or that lawyer that actually built their whole case. They built a case and they wanted to make sure that there were references. So they asked ChatGPT to provide the references, and the references were so plausible looking that the lawyer included them. But of course, the lawyer didn't actually go and like follow up. So I think like a really important thing as we move into this next, basically the new realm of AI, is that we all understand that we need a new mental model. None of our go-to heuristics are going to serve us. And hopefully that we're accelerated along the development of that new mental model, which I'm hoping that, you know, a lot of like, even the kind of more sensational headlines about generative AI and, you know, a kind of like a deceptive video or an article that was written entirely by a chatbot. I think all those things are helpful to dislodge us from the, you know, the go-to mental models that we had before.
So it is both authoritatively and authentically wrong at times.
But yes, and deceptive on those fronts as well. Yeah.
So that you know, what you talked about, how it didn't go search the internet, because it's really just, in a nutshell, and tell me if I get this wrong, predicting what words it thinks should come next based on having read the internet.
Right. And if something is very well documented, the plausible answer will be the right answer, because there's so many examples in the training data set.
So 2 + 2 = 4, it will give me 4.
Don't talk about maths. That's actually you know that one of its Achilles heels. It's a multi-legged thing because it has many Achilles heels. But you know, it's like if you said, for example, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a word that's like Wednesday. You know, how many E's does the word Wednesday have? It probably won't get that right. It struggles with, it's, you know, because it's not a general intelligence. There you go. What a good example of the fact that we are not at artificial general intelligence. Because, you know, and these large language models, they are trained on language. And so they're good at generating language, but it's difficult for them to flex to other tasks.
You know, I have some. Go ahead.
I was going to jump in on the math. The math is really bad. Like I tell people, to your point, Yasmin, that's just not what it was designed for. So, you know, if I'm looking to create a position for a cyber analyst for my company, ChatGPT, all the conversational models, they do a really good job of like this is what a potential job description could look like. This is what the duties could look like, the qualifications. But then when you try to put that into a budget, it does a really great job of scouring the internet and saying the average pay is this. And you drop it into a budget and just basic math no longer works. And this is coming from a person who does not do math in public, because I always feel like I'm going to get it wrong. But when you see that it struggles to do just basic math, it also puts in context for you, like, this is not going to be the answer for everything. You're still going to have to do some work.
So I have a couple of friends, in one who teaches in high school, one who is a professor at college, and I've talked to them both about this, and their take on it I thought was really fascinating, which, the question is, are your students going to use it? And the answer is yes, they will. And we need to accept that reality. And it was teaching them to use it intelligently. And Yasmin, the way you talked about changing our mental model about it, kind of almost like the very early days of Wikipedia, when God knows what was on there. Like, you could use it as a way to gather places to then confirm the information. But now you can use it to have it write something for you, as long as you verify the accuracy independently on your own. Do you think that's a good enough summary?
Yeah. Go on, Nicole.
I was going to say, so I actually used to be a college tutor. And so, of course, my students always wanted to use Wikipedia. And the school had a strict, like, do not use Wikipedia policy. But I was really honest with my students. I'm like, if you need to start at Wikipedia, start there. Get to those footnotes. Like, you got to get to the footnotes. And like, that is where you should be. That's what you should be researching. That's what you should be learning from. Don't use Wikipedia as like the thing that is the end all be all. Do your research. So I think actually comparing it to Wikipedia is a good example, but also your teacher friends and professor friends may feel a very different way about Wikipedia than I do. But I think for the average the average person, most of the time when they're looking for general information, Wikipedia does provide that, like, who is Yasmin Green? And it's like, what you want to know is these like 3 sentences. But if you're going to write a report on Yasmin, you should not copy and paste. So, you should be going to those footnotes, and you should see where she's done interviews. You should look at her official bio. You should look at her website.
My Wikipedia page is 50% wrong. So that's funny that you chose me.
Oh, really? I didn't even know if Jeff had a Wikipedia page. I think you're the only one on here that has a Wikipedia page.
If you look up Jeff Green, you'll get the Miami millionaire who's had some interesting issues. So I would take his money back.
What are yours, Jeff?
I would say both of the teachers, professors, their view was, they're training students for the future, and these kids are going to use it. And it is more important to teach them how to use it wisely than to try to, put the proverbial finger in the dike.
I agree.
Let me see. So
you were going to tell us, you had some ideas for things to know.
Yeah.
Well, one of them I think we touched on, and this is giving away one of my 5. It is, there's the old saying from the Cold War. I'm old. I remember this is Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. With AI, if you have it create something, it is don't trust but verify. You can use it to help you form well-written, good sentences, but you need to make sure the facts are accurate. I love, again, what you talked about changing our mindset about how we use it. It's not a human interaction. It is not an authoritative figure. And I wonder, as we're talking through, is maybe when people have talked about transparency, is teaching it to be less authoritative might be a way to help engage people in a way that's constructive. Let me turn now. I think we're about 30 minutes in. Let's take some questions from the audience, so to speak. And here's the most simple one. Yasmin, you have young kids. Can kids use ChatGPT? What are your thoughts on that one?
I mean, can they? It's very easy to use. If they can type, you can use it. I wouldn't let, I think it's really easy to say don't let kids do things unsupervised because it just assumes that you have infinite time. And what's the point of a screen if not to help you do something else? But maybe, in a supervisor, there are some pretty fun activities that you can do it. I mean, my 8-year-old is into Pokemon. So one of the things that this is a good example of where ChatGPT still needed work. But one of the things I was doing over Christmas when I wanted to show ChatGPT off to her was to ask it to contrast the main poster child for Pokemon, which is Pikachu, with Eevee, who was her favorite Pokemon. And it was kind of conflating their characteristics. They're very different looking, and obviously they have different powers. But because they appear so often together in the training material, they're very rarely dealt with independently. And so they were kind of, it was like inverted, the things that it was saying about one versus the other. So I think for jokes with supervision, I'm all for it. The other thing that we didn't talk about is that, we talked about large language models and text generation, but of course, generative AI creates content in all media, images and video and audio. And that stuff I think really is fun. If you're reading a book with your child and, there's a description of the villain or of the, protagonist's home or their childhood bedroom, you can actually put the prompts into an image generator like DALL-E, and you can keep riffing on that. You can keep saying, and now take the character, and now they've gone outside of the house. What does the garden look like? So there's some pretty cool, like, wow factor experiences.
Have you seen Jesus flipping over tables? How that came out? And it is Jesus literally doing a flip above a table. Yeah, I saw it. I don't know if it's real or not, but it made me laugh, so I don't care. Are there, Yasmin, on the kids, can kids run into age-inappropriate content on it? Are there controls that vary from model to model?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't let my 8-year-old have conversations by herself on, with strangers when she's playing her Nintendo Switch. So I, definitely wouldn't let my kid have a conversation with a chatbot, because you just don't know. I think OpenAI I'm gonna misrepresent one of the tech companies. I think Google just released a version of their chatbot that was for teens. So like that signals the severity with which the tech companies are viewing inviting different, younger people and minors to interact with this content. So they, children, I'm thinking like single digits, or, like tween, or preteen tweens. I don't think anyone in good conscience who's thought about it is recommending that children use it by themselves.
Nicole, you mentioned bias earlier. I'm going to throw this question to you. How do developers address the issue of bias in the models, and what measures are in place to ensure fairness in generated content? Maybe you can talk a little bit about how the bias could work, and take that. And then Yasmin, I think from your side, you guys may have come across that in some of your work with Jigsaw.
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. Yasmin hit on this a little bit earlier. So when we're talking about these large language models, you have to get that data from somewhere. And so I thought it was interesting, Jeff, when you talk about like the dialect, the first time you use ChatGPT and putting it in a dialect, what we've seen over time is, again, the large language models are not using the most accurate information. It's using the widest information. And so it plays up a lot of stereotypes. And so, I have put in, and there's all type of scientific research to show this, but like if I say I would like to write a paper in the voice of a Black woman, most of these conversational chat boxes are not going to have me sounding like this, right? They play up on these like really negative stereotypes about Black people. They play up these really negative stereotypes about women. And that is a result of the bias behind the language models. And so when we talk about what should we be doing, I think it all comes down to accountability and transparency. So we have to be pushing. That's why you see there's a lot of the members of Congress, but also at the state and local level, people are trying to figure out like what should we be requiring from a baseline in terms of transparency, so we can see what language models are being used, what information is being input, and then also have accountability. So if this is pushing not only false narratives and stereotypes, what does accountability look like so that this stuff can be corrected? Because it might be first impression for a lot of people. And some of these issues, we've talked about some of the not so complex or controversial issues that people may be searching with the conversational bots, but you're going to have these bots that are going to be interacting with people in customer service. You're going to have them in what we call government service spaces. And if they have these biases where they think that they are now talking to a Black woman, so they're going to talk in a very different way, or they're not going to share information in the same way as a white male counterpart, that's really problematic. So I would deduce it down to accountability and transparency.
Yasmin, you got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, we've had some experience for sure of bias. I was talking about when, originally understanding the mechanics of machine learning models and and the child development process, and then the vulnerabilities in each of those. And it's, when you have a young child and they're learning to talk, they have like little biases in their language, partly because they expect grammar to be logical. And so they'll say a sentence like, I eated a banana. And you're like, well, I got to give it to you. Maybe it should be eated. It's not, it's I ate a banana. But, you can think of that as a biased output because the training data of their life is biased. It's biased towards like logic to grammar that isn't there. If children don't see, like we went to the zoo and the sea lion sneezed and my daughter said, "Bless you." But it wasn't like, she said the sea lion has a cold, but sea lions just sneeze. That's how they roll. They just need to clear their airwaves. And so they sneeze. It's not because it had a cold, but of course, every time she'd seen a sneeze, she thought, it had been associated with somebody having a cold. So those are really innocuous examples, but you see that if you don't have good quality training data, then, if your training data doesn't reflect your expectations of a child, then you will get output that you then have to fix later. And so with the training, with the machine learning models, it could be that there are things that are happening during the actual training process that are introducing the bias. So, or it could be that the training data itself is biased. So, when one of our machine learning projects was to develop an AI that can detect toxicity in language. And we trained it on a bunch of comments. And then when we were ready to launch, and the AI is very widely used. It's the most popular free API for most publishers and platforms that are large in the 18 countries that are in, use it, New York Times uses it, El País, Le Monde, Wall Street Journal, Reddit, Wikipedia, they all use this API called Perspective. When we launched it, we realized that if you put in a positive comment that mentions being Muslim, the model thought that there was a negative association with it. It thought that it was toxic. Why did it think that a positive comment about Muslims were toxic? Because by and large, the comments that it had been trained on that mentioned the word Muslim had a negative association. And we said before, these are patterns that it's learning. So it's intuiting that the word Muslim must itself have a negative association. So, to Nicole's point, across actually a lot of identity terms where people are persecuted or marginalized and where there's a lot of toxicity online, you have to go back and fix the toxicity issue in the training data so that the model itself doesn't have this systemic bias. And of course, if you're trying to build some algorithms that are designed to promote healthy speech, find toxicity and remove it, the fact that you might have these false positives, that you might be falsely accusing comments that are not toxic but mention targeted identity terms as being toxic is a really huge problem. So we really do have our work cut out for us. And Nicole referenced this right at the front. If the person who probably found the first Muslim, the person to first discover the issue with bias around the term Muslim was probably a Muslim person. People who went in and they looked for, their own faiths and their own names and their own. So if you don't have a representative group of people who are developing the tech and doing the quality assurance, you won't find this stuff to fix it. So I think, I'd probably, add representation to the accountability and transparency list that Nicole gave.
But if you're training the model to detect toxic language, you need to give it toxic content, which is kind of, you wouldn't think that you would want to introduce that. But I guess if you want it to help you At the lower level, it needs to know it. So at the higher level, it can stop it from being published. It's this weird.
That's a really profound point. That we
I
don't.
stole it from someone, so
I'm surprised, Jeff. No, that you don't actually necessarily want to sanitize your foundational models from everything that you think is bad, because that will have unintended consequences later. In that, for example, you won't be able to have moderation algorithms that are trying to find bad stuff in comments and remove them.
So one other question, I love this, is AI going to take my job? I'll jump in, and then, I mean, the answer is, I mean, maybe. It depends what your job is. Ideally, it changes jobs, but the reality is that it will change. When we're talking about the generative AI, it will definitely change some of the support work, the customer service, a lot of it. It hopefully will make it better with fewer people in the cybersecurity realm. It's certainly going to lower the number of humans needed to do the same amount of security, but we don't have enough humans there already. The question of whether it's going to be a sentient robot doing your job is, I think, off in the distance, but I think it would be wrong for anyone who tries to tell you with absolute certainty that it won't is probably wrong. But we still don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but it will change the workforce. Like that's how I see it, and we need to confront that and understand it and try to make the impacts as minimal as possible on our society in terms of employment.
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting about this AI revolution, and I think all technological revolutions before that, is that it looks like it's disproportionately going to hit the more educated. That's really interesting. So, one of the impressive things that chatbots can do is they can write code. They can't do maths, but they can write code, because there's so many examples of code written out there. Very large repositories.
Computer code, you mean?
Yeah, computer code. So it's just funny that programmers have developed a technology, which are these chatbots, that will replace their own labor. I mean, I don't like anyone being displaced from their work. I think has huge societal implications. But there's just something perversely sweet about having the people who are the innovators have to suffer some of the displacement of the innovation.
So I can give an example that I think most people will like. Going back, if you actually train a model only on actual legal cases and case law, it could probably start writing pretty good legal briefs. So it's gonna take potentially a lot of the people out of, I guess we're not going to get to the ideal no lawyer world, but you're going to have far fewer, and those expensive educations are going to be, I'm glad my loans are paid off, are going to be a lot less than useful potentially. Maybe we'll find other. Nicole, do you have thoughts on the work question?
I do. I mean, as someone who has not paid off her student loans from law school, I hope it does not replace me before I'm able to do that. But I think it brings up an interesting question, because, my dad is like a United Steelworker. And so most of the time, to Yasmin's point, when we talked about innovation, it's people that are doing those kind of jobs that have been adversely impacted the most, those jobs that require more manual skills. And so when we're talking about like what generative AI specifically, what it can do, it does start to feel like it is going to impact not just what people call the white collar professions, but also the creative professions. So, we're talking about DALL-E and how it can create images. But also, there are people who write these scripts. We mentioned earlier the writer's strike. They write these scripts. They do all of these creative pursuits. But I hold out a little bit of hope, because, and this is just things that I've been reading, but also my experience, it still doesn't get it quite right. Like even with DALL-E, I feel like it would probably make a graphic designer not go crazy trying to do something with me, because I could show up and say, this is what I like and this is what I don't like and this is what I put in. But even when I play with that, like trying to think about a new logo, it just doesn't get it exactly right. And then I don't know all the prompts because I'm not a graphic designer. So there's only so much I can tell it to do to make it do the thing. I think we'll see similar with lawyers. So I do think, for those junior associates straight out of law school and early in their career, I think it is going to be disproportionately or is going to disproportionately impact them. But I think about the kind of analysis that we do and like how Jeff and I worked together on legislation and we worked on policy. Sometimes you're coming up with something new. So there is no language model. Like we're trying something that hasn't been done, especially on tech and cyber policy. This hasn't been done anywhere. So it's going to be really hard for any type of generative tool to come up with the same type of analysis or the same way to address a problem. So I think what we've been seeing, and you see it especially a lot with communities of color and marginalized communities, what I hope we will be able in a place to do is not do what we've done in the past, which is like go fast, break things, hurt people, and then sit back and say, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should have done this in a different way. I hope because it is targeting a different demographic that people will slow down a little bit and think, who are we leaving behind and how do we make sure we bring them forward with us?
So one last question, try to do quick answer, and then because we're running up on time, but I do want to get this one in, and then we'll go to our 5 recommendations. How do you see generative AI being used and playing a role in the 2024 elections? And I think we should talk globally because I think it's 40% or more of people around the world will have an election in 2024. So quick thoughts on where you see this playing. Yasmin, maybe then Nicole.
I mean, I do think we'll see images and videos that are synthetically created. The interesting thing is that the ones that we've seen so far have been clearly, well, I think they've been described or they've been reported on as synthetically created. I remember when we did some research with some people who were false flag, like disinformation people. So they thought every time there was a school shooting or something, they thought it was a government conspiracy to ultimately take away your guns, but they thought they were crisis actors, and it was an interesting study for another podcast. But one of the things, we showed them something that had been going viral in their community. We showed them an image of one of the victims of the shooting, and we showed them that it was a doctored image. And universally they said, oh, well, even if that's fake, that's emblematic of something that person would have done. So like we're really, there's so much motivated reasoning now around the topics that we're most concerned about for disinformation. So, there was a study of DALL-E, that's OpenAI's image generator, where academics put in prompts. So if you say, show me someone stealing an election, it doesn't generate an image. But if you say, show me somebody stuffing pieces of paper into a tin box and wearing a name tag that shows they're official, and then you can create a bunch of images that look like they're supporting the Stop the Steal narrative. And even if they look synthetic, they are somehow going to be useful for propagating a really harmful, election disinformation theme. So I do expect we'll see it, it's the rubber meets the road for detection and protection systems. All the platforms are aware that it's coming, and now we have to see how well they'll do at spotting it and making sure that they're not helping with virality.
Nicole?
Yeah, I will just +1 to what Yasmin said. And what I would add is AI just amplifies. So it amplifies good, it amplifies bad. One of the things that I'm most concerned about the 2024 election is how it's going to amplify these messages of what people call voter depression. So you have communities that are, over the course of an election, they're overwhelmingly targeted already with your vote doesn't matter, nothing's going to change, democracy isn't working. And AI is going to allow that to become a much more persistent targeting, but also just very tailored to like what is going on, what is happening at the local level, what is happening at the state level. And that really worries me, because when you talk about voter depression, that's the difference between someone going to vote that's the difference between someone registering to vote, and to have communities, especially marginalized communities that are already targets of these campaigns, like Yasmin was saying, now they're just going to be targeted all year long. Like it's already started, right? Like we've already seen some generative AI tools that were used to create these, like to really just exploit the tensions and the emotions of Black Lives Matter, where it was a AI generated image of a Black man being shot in the car. And, that I looked at that image and it already had the mark on it, because this was a part of a journalist investigation, that it was artificial intelligence. And it's still, even seeing that, it still made me have a very visible and emotional reaction. And so for people who don't even know, who don't have that tag, or they find out later, it doesn't really change the emotion that you feel in that moment. And it doesn't change the depression that you may feel or the disillusionment that you may feel about your day to day.
I will be a little contrarian, and for perverse, I think, reasons. I think we are so now conditioned to what is the word you used, the description, Yasmin, of reasoning? I loved it, or why people are
motivated reasoning.
Motivated reasoning is that we are past the point where it doesn't even have to be. I'm not worried about a good fake, because a bad fake doesn't matter. And I think it is a problem, but I'm not sure it's going to be as big an additional problem because we're already in a bad place in that regard. So we're going to wrap up, but first let's do as promised in the title. Yasmin, if you have 5 things that you would leave people, and then Nicole, if yours are different, or the same, you can just drop down. And I'm hoping you guys hit all of mine, so I don't have any at the end. So Yasmin,
I'm going to test the listeners' or viewers' ability to do maths, because I'm going to say a number of them, and it's not going to be 5. So one is to leave you with is to emphasize that we need a new mental model. The second is that the best way for us to develop that, and the best way for everyone to feel empowered and informed about the new AI paradigm that we're entering into, is to learn by doing. So go and use, Bard, which is Google's version of a chatbot that I did a horrible job of plugging, or ChatGPT, which is OpenAI's version of chatbot that's a lot more popular, and the image generators, and experiment for yourself and see where they fall short, and see where you're impressed, and see the limits. And I think if you understand that we need a new mental model, and you're really exploring the boundaries of it, then I can feel that I can say this responsibly, which is to ask people to go and look for the magic in AI.
Great. Nicole.
So I actually used generative AI to come up with my 5. Because what else?
I'm glad we got this far before someone said I asked. So
I mean, I tried to do it by myself. And I came up with a list, but then I wanted an acronym. And like, this is kind of where the conversational chat boxes kind of shine. So the acronym is PAINT, and I would encourage people to remember to paint and to also try to paint. PAINT stands for, and all of these are things that generative AI can do and how you can interact with it. The P is for performs repetitive tasks. The A is automates jobs. The I is identifies patterns. The N is needs human oversight. And the T is transparency is important. So for me, those are the things, like, it does do repetitive tasks. And even when we talk about automating jobs, some jobs we can benefit from automation. We just need to make sure that we don't leave people behind. And then identifying the patterns, of course, I think that's really important, but we hit on the point of it matters what the inputs of those patterns are before we accept the outputs. And of course, it needs human oversight. I can't state that enough. And then transparency. We have to be able to know how these things are being built. We have to be, and that's not something that we should learn on the back end, all the way through the process. We need full transparency on what's being done.
So I will give my 5, one I gave before, which is do not trust and verify. Make sure you look into what it tells you. Kind of echoing Yasmin, play around with it, learn how to use it, what it can't use. Don't be afraid to use it. The third one is don't forget everything you know when it comes to life or security or cybersecurity, all the same rules that you've applied. Trust your intuition when you're playing with it. The fourth is a phrase I got from someone at a conference last week, which is panic responsibly. It's okay if it worries you because something is doing, you hear about it, but take a breath. Don't overreact to the good and the bad. And then finally is just have fun with it. And so that I'm ending with Yasmin, find the magic in it. So Yasmin, Nicole, I really appreciate the time. I want to turn back again and thank 92NY for making this happen today. It's been a great conversation. Again, ask everyone, join us at the Aspen Cyber Summit at 92NY on November 15th, info at aspencybersummit.org. And if you want to get in at a super discounted rate, you can use the code 92NY and it's $100 to register. A great day. And as I said, everything from AI to the bird drone conspiracy to the election. So hopefully we can see you there in November. But thanks again for your time. Thanks, Yasmin and Nicole.